what I'd like to talk about today, if it's okay with you, James, is the most important member of the crew of any pirate ship, of any ship really, and that isn't the captain. That's the cook, the lowly cook, because it was the cook, as far as the pirates are concerned, who won most of the battles. And let me explain how. An ordinary ship, Her Majesty's Royal Naval ship, a Spanish ship, or whatever, they've got a job to do. They're going to go from A to B, back to A. They've got a class system whereby you have the captain, the officers, and the men. Divided, the ship is already divided into two. And the captain and the officers will eat good food, and the men will eat the slops. Basically, crap. So what happens then is you've got a crew who gets sick. They get dysentery, they get diarrhea above all, and severe, because of the food, severe headaches, migraines. So imagine that they come across a pirate ship and there's all these guys, none of them are sick. They're all ready to go and they're shouting, and we're going to have you. And you're on this French or Spanish or British ship and you've got diarrhea and you must now lift your musket to defend the ship or a sword. How on earth are you going to do that when you're so sick? You're going to surrender immediately. They've always said that the reason the pirate always won was because of the fear of the others, because the way the pirate would comport himself with his black flag and his screaming and shouting, we're going to have you, would frighten the opposition. Well, that is true. I'm not going to say it's not true. It's true. But you have to add to that the fact that this frightened crew are sick. At least 60% of them are suffering from something. They don't have the ability to fight properly. And they're now faced by a load of guys that are strong and healthy. And psychologically, this was the total blow. They surrendered. So how comes the pirates were so healthy when the Navy guys were all sick? If today the captain had eggs and bacon for breakfast, because of the pirate code and the equality of the pirate code, which was not only about sharing, you've got one share, I've got one share, but it was a total equality. If the captain today has eggs and bacon for breakfast, the entire crew must have eggs and bacon for breakfast. So where did the cook get all this eggs and bacon? And so what he had was, he had up to 35 to 60 cages on deck. Each cage would contain 2 chickens, egg-laying chickens. He would have in the corner, port and starboard, 1 or often 2 sows with piglets, suckling piglets, and they would be there. Now, one would say, oh, right, so they can eat chicken and pork. No, they didn't eat the sow and they didn't eat the chickens. The chickens were there to lay eggs, and they would lay up to 160, 200 eggs a week, which was enough to give that strong protein to the crew. And the entire crew had always, each of them, never mind their position on the ship, the same food. So the food had to be good, and it was good. And the trick of the cook was in husbandry, not only in cooking clean food, but in the supply of the food. And the supply of the food when you're at sea is a big problem. So he was a magician in husbandry. Because the pirate ship wasn't going from A to B and back to C or wherever, it was just roaming around waiting, and it knew that there's nothing to do for 10 days until these ships come, and we know they're coming. So for 10 days, we've got nothing to do. So they would choose small uninhabited islands, and they would unload the 2 sows and piglets, unload all the chickens, and let them roam around and feed. And then when they put them back onto the ship, because they're going to sail away, they would leave chickens with the cock. They would leave several, if not all, the piglets. And so when they came back next year to the same place, they had a bountiful supply of pork and chickens. Now, they didn't do this just once. They did it everywhere and all the time. So they spread throughout, especially the Caribbean, they spread chickens and pigs. And that is why many of these islands even today have got chickens and pigs. It's because they were left there originally by the pirates. But the fact of the matter is that the cook was into husbandry to a point where he had his own chart, and he would have a copy of the captain's chart, and he would say to the captain, look, we put these chickens on this island 9 months ago, so if we're going to go back, try and go back via that island, because we can collect all. And that's what they did. So they worked very, very closely together, the cook and the captain, in the supply of food. And at the same time, the cook, apart from husbandry and being a cook, 2 jobs in one, he had a 3rd job. There were islands where he would take the crew, or some members of the crew, to forage. And they would forage fruit, they would forage berries, they would forage all kinds of stuff. So in real terms, the pirate ship had a diet which was second to none. There was no country in the world had a diet like on a pirate ship. And that is why they were so healthy all the time. And that is why the cook was really main member of the crew, if not the most important.
That is so brilliant. And I've got so many questions that I don't even think where to start. So, I mean,
well, I would like the people to understand that when they see a film and they see the captain and his orders and what he's doing, right, try to understand that behind it all was the cook.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that made me think of that story is, have you heard the story where they talk about at NASA, and I think it was JFK was walking around NASA and he met the guy whose job it was to clean the toilets. And he said, oh, what do you do? What do you do here? And the guy said, oh, it's my job to help put a man on the moon. As small as it sounds, it's those small details. The fact that, yeah, of course, if half of this ship are ill because the captain takes all the good food, and we're talking about the Navy ships and these other ships,
yeah,
then of course, when these healthy pirates rock up, but more what got me there is when you spoke about the planning of leaving the chickens and the pigs in the specific places, and then obviously consulting with the captain on the map. One thing that I think I've got a question of there is, when you said there's the cook, but is it just the cook? I know he'd have maybe the help of cabin boy or others, but how many would almost be in his, let's call it his team, helping him both produce the food and cook the food and serve the food to these crews?
Well, he's doing this in times of non-action, right? So those who, in times of action, do the menial task, like collecting the cannonballs, so there would be the boys or the old guys. In non-attack times, the boys, a couple of boys and a couple of old guys, would be assistants to the cook, and therefore he would have always 4 assistants with him, minimum. But when it came to the foraging, he would use virtually half the crew. The crew would put the longboat down, they would row him to the island with all the cages. So the entire crew would come together to do this job. It was just the cook who would then, in the foraging part of it, say, look, this is the leaf we've got to find. So the crew all got a leaf and they went around tried to find other leaves that matched it. You know, they didn't need to use their brains. It was the cook who told them what they've got to look for. And so they went and looked. So if you've got 30 or 40 guys on an island rummaging around, you're going to find a whole bunch of stuff very quickly.
Where do you start before you become the cook on a ship? Are you an assistant? Because like you said, you've got to learn all of those things to know them before you can direct others. It's not like there's a team of head chef, assistant chef, sous chef.
Well, I would, roughly speaking, because I don't know the numbers, but I would say 20% of the cooks were like cooks today, people who are born and they want to be a cook. And all our famous chefs today are there because that is their passion. So I would say about 2 out of 10 were due to this passion. But the others were poached. They would be cooks on a naval ship that can't take it anymore, literally psychologically broken, because he has to serve a bottle of wine and chicken to the captain, to the officers, and he has to serve pork in brine and slops to the crew, and he couldn't take that anymore. So he's left that and he's joined the pirates. So I would say 8 out of 10 cooks on pirate ships came from that source.
I know a few chefs that I'm thinking of now you say that have almost done the same thing nowadays, of working in awful conditions for big restaurants and end up leaving to do their own thing. So yeah, I could almost see where those modern day pirates would be.
For the cook himself, with this passion, it takes it to another level. And that is why the health of the crew on pirate ships was so outstanding. How if somebody had to have an operation or lost a limb, they lived because of the cleanliness. They lived because the cook was there continually boiling water.
So yes, the cook, and I agree with you from what you're saying, it makes perfect sense as to why they're the most important person. But there's another way you spoke about the cannonballs and the cabin boys going down to grab them and that situation. There was something you told me about the misunderstanding or the misconception maybe of pirates and the eye patch.
Well, it's very simple actually. There are always pirates with eye patches, and they wondered how comes they all lost an eye or whatever. Well, let me tell you that the eye patches were worn by the young boys. There were 2, 3, sometimes 4 young boys, and the older, more not decrepit, but slow to move older pirates. They were seen in action because they were only ever worn in action. There was nothing wrong with the eye. But if you can imagine that you're fighting or attacking something, then the cannon master needs cannonballs. And all the cannonballs were stored as ballast in the bottom of the ship. So as they needed more cannonballs, the boys and the old guys were sent down to the bottom of the ship to collect cannonballs, and they were usually at least 2 different sizes. So the bottom of the ship is total darkness. You can't see anything. There's also gunpowder in there, so you can't go in there with a cannon. So because they had an eye patch up on deck that was always, the eye was always dark, when they went down into the dark, they would put the eye patch on the other side so that the eye-patched eye could now see in the dark, and it could see which cannonball they needed to pick up. They didn't see that well, but a lot better than they would have done had they gone from the sunshine deck into total darkness. So that is the reason they wore the eye patches. Today we talk about team building, and a lot of money is spent on team building. Well, this was team building, pure and simple, in perfection. And every single member of that team, that crew, knew exactly what he had to do, what the guy above him had to do, what the guy below him had to do, so he could take over those jobs at any time. And this team was so in tune with each other that they virtually had a telepathy going. Whereas when they were to attack, the attacks were done in such a way that you didn't have to order the guy to jump on board. He knew what he had to do before you told him. And so this team building, if you like, was, if you're looking at the captain or you're looking at the lowest member of the crew, you're looking at the same person. Well, they were a team because they were pirates, because they had all come together with one aim, and it was freedom. We are free men. We're doing something for ourselves. We can one day go back to our families, but we are all in the same mind frame. Be it the captain or be it the boy with the eye patch, they're all on the same route. And therefore, to come together as a team is the most natural thing to do because they all want the same thing. The cook didn't have to get the captain to order 20 men to go foraging. They did it automatically.
It just makes so much sense. And there was one thing you spoke to me about before, which also makes sense, which is the barrels of fresh water. Would you be able to explain that a bit?
Well, this is another pirate trick. If a ship is going from A to B and then from B to A, which was the general situation of a normal ship or a normal naval ship, at A, they will take enough water to arrive at B. At B, they would take enough water to go back to A. In a pirate ship, that wasn't the case because the pirates didn't have an A and B. They just roamed around, enjoying life, knowing, oh, we'll go to that island. We've got nothing to do for 10 days. We go to that island and we can make some bacon, for example. But here we have a question of survival, water, and navigation. A lot is missed in the navigation part. So the captain and his number one are the navigators. So to navigate a ship, it's a sail ship, so there's no power apart from wind. From A to B is a really difficult thing to do. You have to be a really good navigator to do that. To show you just how good they were at navigation, there are places in the sea, many of them, not just one or two, where freshwater springs come up from the bottom of the ocean. And they are underground rivers that have flowed to a point where it now comes up under the sea. And because fresh water is a lot lighter than seawater, it comes to the surface. When it does so, and I've seen this, so I can describe it from memory. What you see is a patch of water, which is different from the water around it. And you go to the center of this patch and you put a bucket down, bring it up, taste it, and it's fresh water. It's fresh water that has come up from the bottom of the sea and is there, depending on wind, depending on tide, depending on currents, how this fresh water that's coming up ends at the surface. It doesn't necessarily end at the surface right above where it's come out. It might drift one way or the other. So once you've found one of these areas, one, you can fill up with fresh water. Two, you mark this on your chart, on your pirate chart, so that if necessary, you can go back there again for fresh water. And like islands in the sea with chickens, on the chart is marked freshwater points where rivers, underground rivers, come up to the surface. Now, this is a normal thing, it happens, it's happening now, it happens all the time. But in those days, for a navigator to go back to that phenomenon, to that fresh water coming up in the sea, when there is no islands, no land, nothing to take a sighting from, and find it again, that is a miracle of navigation in those days.
Premiumbeat.com.
Over these last couple of episodes where you've really taught us all the things we didn't know about pirates, and it's what you touched on earlier about the way they're presented as opposed to the reality of how smart they were. Thank you for teaching us all these things that most people wouldn't know.
I find it my job in a way to be a spokesman for all the pirates that are still active around the world today and say, listen, public, it's not like that. You know, I'm not saying that we're white and good, but what I'm saying is we are not like we are portrayed to be.